I'm Steve Becker, I'm the Policy Counsel at the Iowa Environmental Council. I'm honored to serve as moderator for this session. We are grateful to have these expert voices here with us. So let's get into it. And I'd like to first introduce our panelists. So, Sikalis Novus, Haya, Selkau, George Horton First Nation of Saskatchewan, Canada, grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, now lives in Iowa City. She's the founder and executive director of Great Plains Action Society, a grassroots and fully indigenous-led organization working throughout so-called Iowa, so-called Nebraska, and the Great Plains. Sikalis started her journey fighting for indigenous rights when she was 19, working at the New Brunswick Aboriginal People's Council in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, during the Burnt Church Rebellion. She has a master's degree in religious studies and a graduate minor in Native Studies from the University of Iowa. She's also a speaker, writer, artist, and believes that environmental and social justice work are inextricably linked and change only when we dismantle colonial capitalist systems and rebuild them with a decolonized worldview. She fights for a better future for her two children. Let's hear it for Sikalis. Next to Sikalis is Corinne Stein. She's an organizer for Moms Clean Air Force and its Eco Mod Race program. Moms Clean Air Force, a member of the Clean Up Madam Coalition in Iowa, is a national organization of over 1 million caretakers united against air and climate pollution, with field organizers in 26 states and volunteers in all others. Corinne, a Colombian citizen and granddaughter of German immigrants who arrived in South America 100 years ago, grew up on a remote, off-the-grid cattle and rice farm in the eastern plains of Colombia. She later lived in Costa Rica, where her father continued to farm, and where she and her siblings direct a watershed conservation foundation that restores rainforests and protects the water source in Puerto Limon, Costa Rica's third largest city. Corinne arrived in Iowa in 1980 on a student scholarship to Grinnell College, obtained a degree in biology, and later a master's degree in horticulture from Iowa State. Since 2000, Corinne has pursued her lifelong dedication to music as her primary profession. She directs 8 Latin ensembles which perform nationally and internationally, and she often uses her concert as a tool to inform about air pollution and climate change. She has lived in rural Iowa for 40 years, and as a result of spending most of her life in rural areas around the Americas, Corinne has observed firsthand how climate change has played out wherever she has lived. Her husband and 3 grown daughters continually inspire her to protect the environment, fight for climate change any way they can. Corinne's work has been highlighted by Univision, the Des Moines Register, the Gazette, L'Opinion, the Pedro Viaje Show, Environmental Social Justice Podcast, Air Health, Our Health Podcast, and Axios, among others. Let's hear it for Corinne. And next to Corinne is Carrie Johansson. She is the Energy Program Director with the Iowa Environmental Council. She has over a decade of experience in energy policy, most recently serving as the Council's Manager of Government Affairs, leading state-led legislative strategy. She previously developed energy policy with the U.S. Senate Ag Committee, administered the Iowa Power Fund for Innovative Energy Projects, and worked as an analyst and legislative liaison with the Iowa Utilities Board. Before joining the council in 2016, Carrie has a BA from Gustavus Adolphus College and a master's in public policy from the Humphrey Institute at the University of Minnesota. Let's hear it for Carrie. So we're going to get into some questions now. And the first ones will be directed individually. So the first is for Sikalis. So Sikalis, what are your concerns about coal plants and their impacts on indigenous people?
Firstly, Tansi, Meo, Pone Piti, Gisigao, hello, good afternoon. That's how we say that in my language, Plains Cree. And thank you for having me here today. To IEC, who's always doing wonderful things, and to my panel and moderator, and also to all the people in the audience that I know is also doing a lot of work. You know, for instance, I see Emma, who literally runs a no coal campaign for the Sierra Club. So there's a lot of experts in the audience as well. And so I guess what concerns me about coal plants and their impacts on Indigenous peoples, specifically with the coal plants here in Iowa, the George Neal North and South that we've been fighting, is that they are, in my opinion, most likely specifically located between two of Nebraska's largest reservations. Well, basically 2 of the 3 reservations, and Sioux City, which has a very high Indigenous population compared to the rest of Iowa. Native folks make up about 3% there on a good day, which is actually kind of high. And so these coal plants, what's coming out of them, like from the top and the bottom, is affecting the health of Indigenous peoples. And this is not an unheard of event. This is something that's been going on since colonization. Black Mesa on the Navajo Nation is a great example of Indigenous peoples that have been fighting the impacts of coal mining, water pollution, land degradation now for, oh man, they've been fighting that. I can't even put a number to it, but I would say at least 50 years, if not more. And there are so many health impacts. There's so many, the cancer rates are very high there. And unfortunately, because we're such a grassroots organization, it's been really hard to get the cancer rates for the Winnebago and Omaha nations, which are really just like the Winnebago Nation is really just like a mile or so south. Like it hits the very top of the Winnebago border. And when I talk to folks like the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, her name is Sunshine Bear, she tells me stories about how people swim there in that river, in the Missouri River, every summer. They have all sorts of activities going there, and then all the streams that are coming off of it into the reservation are also being used, and the cancer rates are very high. So that's all I can really tell you for now, because the government doesn't like to really keep statistics on us, because it's a white supremacist institution. But we're working on it. So we have today here our new land defense organizer, Nicole Rains, with a degree in environmental science. So now I feel like we can do a lot more.
No, I guess this now works. It does.
Oh,
it's yours. We don't need it anymore.
So, Corinne, do you believe we are underestimating the health impacts from Iowa's coal plants, especially after the 2023 study linking Iowa coal plant PM 2.5 emissions to death in Iowa?
The answer is hands down, absolutely yes, for a variety of reasons. First of all, allow me to just record myself. First of all, the effect of particle pollution, PM 2.5 you mentioned, is to understand it has been a cumulative process. So the science is evolving on this, and the more we find out, the more we realize how incredibly damaging particle pollution is. It's one of the leading causes of death around the world, and also in the United States. Around the world, 8 million people die every year from the inhalation of particle pollution, which plays out in a number of ways. Of course, primarily lung disease, but also heart disease and cancer. And because it's a cumulative process to understand how PM 2.5 or particle pollution has been affecting humans, it's been underestimated historically. So for that reason alone, it's underestimated. And the fact that this 2023 study reflects a clear link means that science is catching up. What does 2.5 PM mean? 2.5 is a technical term for a particle that is so small the eye does not detect it. It's at least 30 times smaller than the diameter of a hair. That means that when it gets inhaled, it goes into the lungs and enters the bloodstream. And I want to say something about, because at Moms Clean Air Force, which is, as Steve mentioned, a national organization of 1.5 million members, and we focus on protecting children and vulnerable individuals from the effects of air pollution and the climate crisis. Because one of our main talking concerns is particle pollution, let me just go a little bit into that with regard to children, because that's another reason why we underestimate the effect of PM 2.5. This tiny, tiny particle, when inhaled, enters the bloodstream, and if you're pregnant, that gets into your fetus. It transcends the placental barrier. It is that small and that dangerous. If you live, as many people do, especially people of color, close to a source pollution point, like a coal plant in Iowa, and the statistics are pretty clear for the northwest section of Iowa and even in near Muscatine, then about the health, the health effects of big industrial polluters such as these two coal plants up in northwest and the third one in southeast Iowa. When you live near there, if you're carrying a fetus, that fetus is already born with a disadvantage. That fetus is already born probably with a likelihood of some kind of damage in the heart, in the lungs, or in its development. So that's another reason why we're underestimating it, because this plays out over years to come, right? The baby's born, and then over the next 20 years, parents find out all these health effects that seem mysterious, but we now know they're not. And the other reason we are underestimating the health effect of PM 2.5, this minute particle pollution, is that it can, of course, play out in a variety of ways. And it gets reinforced by other things, such as, for example, agricultural pollution, which is everywhere in Iowa. We're a highly polluted state. People think of Iowa as having water quality problems. We do. But we don't typically think of Iowa as having air pollution problems, but we do, very much so. It's not an accident that our asthma rates are higher than the national average. And so you go, you live in an area, you work in an area that is day in and day out exposed to PM 2.5 coming from coal plants, and you live in an agricultural state, so this gets reinforced by all kinds of things that we are generating through primarily corporate agriculture, large-scale agriculture. And then you live in a home that may or may not have adequate clean air filtration. And so this pollution that's on the outside, you can never escape it because it's also inside your house. And another reason, the third reason why we don't have the true estimate of what goes on is that the problems get expressed over years. And you may develop lung problems, you may develop a heart problem, your child may have a developmental disorder, I may have a heart issue, or some other problem. And so it looks like this funny collection of health expressions, which ultimately we're understanding more and more go back to particle pollution. So absolutely, hands down, underestimated.
Thanks, Bree. So Carrie, question for you. So can you discuss how coal plants are impacting the energy burden?
Yeah, so, historically, there's been a lot of talk about Iowa being a place where we have low-cost energy, and our early investments in renewable energy really did help stabilize our energy rates for a while. But recently we've seen rate increases go into effect, especially in Alliance service territory, though we know that American has been steadily increasing their riders and increasing the rates over the last 10 years as well. And the way that coal plants play into that discussion is because these plants are being operated even in a way, and even though they're losing money. So studies have shown collectively the coal plants have lost about $100 million in just recent years. And that's money that each of us has to pay on our electricity bills. We pay for all of it, no matter what the utility, whether they are making money on the back end or not. And so the coal plants, when they're losing money and we're forced to pay for it, that just exacerbates issues having to do with people's ability to pay their bills. And in some parts of Iowa, we actually, in quite a few parts of Iowa, we are ranked at 97th, 98th, 99th percentile for energy burden nationally. So this is the percentage of people's income that they pay towards energy costs. It's a combination of things. It also has to do with the age of our housing. And so older housing is going to be obviously a higher energy use, more leaky, older furnaces, etc. But you combine older housing with high energy rates, and people are really paying way more than they should. Plus the lack of accountability that has led us to have coal plants that are operating without a restriction on the economic side. And I'm going to throw it back over to Steve here because Steve has a long history in working in energy, working for both Mid-American and Alliant Energy for some time on the environmental side and regulatory side, and then running a solar company as well. So we've got all of it. And Steve, I thought it would be helpful for you to share a little bit too about what kind of environmental concerns there might be. We're kind of trying to get beyond just climate change, right? To think about like the hazards that these plants pose to Iowa. What hazards might still exist even after coal plants stop operating?
Oh, thanks, Gary. I appreciate that question. I'm going to pick up where actually Karine left off, because one of the things we might not think about is a longer-term impact. And so when she talks about PM 2.5, part of the underlying study I referenced was understanding that PM 2.5 is a measure. It's not the actual pollutant. And so when we're actually emitting PM 2.5, it's what's in it that actually counts. And so coal plants, and based on what's in coal, you have a litany of various toxics and metals that are actually composed within that particle. And so if we were actually to speciate that, we would understand that these are chemicals that, again, once they're in the body, they don't leave. Basically, they're not going to go away. They just accumulate there. So even after the plants close, if it's in your body, like many things that eventually cause cancer, it's there. It's in the background, and eventually it may pop up as a cancer. It's not going to be instant, but it's a long-term impact. If I look at the aspects of the plant itself, and so maybe most people don't even know what a manufactured gas plant site is, but prior to natural gas, we actually use coal to generate gas. So rather than burning the coal, you would basically heat the coal to a point where it gasified. Well, guess what we paid for? The utilities actually ended up paying after the fact to clean up all those sites across Iowa. I believe the same thing will happen here. Why? Because the coal hasn't changed. It's the same coal, has the same elements in it. And so whether I'm talking about an ash pond that will remain after the fact, an ash landfill after the fact, eventually we're likely to see contamination occur where it'll first impact the groundwater. And so once it does that, then we have to come up with a way to actually resolve that. It might actually be, digging it back up and, solidifying it. But in the meantime, we have basically all these sites out there Many of them are unknown because coal's been around for a long time. And so when they originally was put in the ground, they weren't lined. They were unlined landfills. We don't even know where some of them are, but eventually that might show up in the groundwater. Even a facility that meets today's standards eventually may fail. So yes, definitely impacts coming down the road are likely to be there. I guess otherwise, I could look at the site itself, and there might be an impact on the site, but that's more readily accessible. And as they raise the facility and get rid of it, they will clean that up. But it's the areas that we're not looking for. For instance, many people don't know that coal ash actually has a beneficial reuse. Well, sometimes that's beneficial, sometimes it's not. If it went into concrete, sure, it creates a solid. It basically contains all those contaminants. I'll tell you right point blank, many places in Iowa have used it for the road bed. They've actually used it in feedlots. All these things are out there, but we just don't have a database of it. So will there be? Yes, sir. My simple answer is yes. I'm going to transfer over to some general questions, and feel free to take up what you want. So let's start with sort of picking up where I left off. How can coal plants impact water quantity and quality?
Okay, I'm going to pick up where I left off too. Another way why we underestimate the damage is because things travel. I was just talking about using water bodies. What comes out of coal plants travels in the air. I focus mostly on people living nearby, but it travels in the air, and it travels downstream. In Iowa, we have at least 20 mercury advisories at any given time in water bodies where people fish. And some cultures fish more than others. Some cultures use water more than others. And so water quality has been a huge concern at Moms Clean Air Force. In fact, the organization cut its teeth when it started on mercury pollution. Mercury is one of, 80 different dangerous air pollutants that come with coal burning. We focused on mercury and mostly because it so affects the fetus. There is basically no safe level of mercury, period. The old adage of the solution to pollution is dilution. That's not the case with mercury. So the mercury that gets generated in Sioux City by Mid-American, where does it go? It travels down the Mississippi. The pollution, sorry, the what? The Missouri. And I was thinking, thank you very much. And I was thinking of the other Mid-American plant in Muscatine. That travels down the Mississippi. The Missouri flows into the Mississippi. That stuff goes south. And there are all kinds of cultures along the way that fish and use that water. Now let me tell you something about mercury in particular. Not to say that arsenic and all the gases that are emitted aren't also a disaster. But there's something unique about mercury. When the mercury goes from the air, from the ashes that land on the water, it gets taken up through the gills of fish. That mercury also gets converted by certain microorganisms into methyl mercury, which is a highly toxic substance. All of that enters fish through the gill system. Those fish get eaten. Methyl mercury concentrates in the fatty tissue preferentially. So people eat it all the way down to the ocean, and the longer a fish lives, so the larger species have higher concentration of mercury in their system. And then pregnant people eat that fish. What is the one organ in a pregnant woman's body, in the fetus? What's the one organ that has the most fat? It's the brain. It's the brain of the fetus. You can measure mercury emissions near the plant, and it's a certain concentration. When it gets concentrated more and more going downstream, it can be hundreds of times higher in concentration than when it first left the plant. So to measure these things near the plant is important, but it doesn't tell us what happens downstream. And these fetuses that get exposed to methylmercury, that have that concentrate in their brains, they are born with developmental problems, with motor, what do you call it, the mobility issues. So absolutely, coal will affect water quality and therefore the health of humans, if only for that reason. And the humans that get born and turn into adults that do not live up to their potential because they were damaged along the way by mercury. And that's just one example.
So, yeah, and there's the mercury kind of, the way it gets into the water frequently is through the air. It can get through other ways, but I wanted to talk on a couple of other water threats. We all worked together on this last year. A lot of coal ash used to be ponds and now been converted to landfills, so you don't have a slushy pond the way you used to, full of water, but they still do. When it rains, you get rainwater pooling. It creates something called leachate. And when we have a lot of rain, which we frequently do in Iowa, you can have flooding. A lot of these plants are located right next to the river. You can have overflow of leachate ponds into the river. That's bad enough. However, we did successfully squash a proposal by Mid-American last year to actually just build a pipe to the Missouri River from their leachate pond, so that when the water got high enough, it would just flow straight into the river. He said, absolutely not. And with a lot of great local activism and organizing, we got that proposal quietly withdrawn at the DNR. So we'll keep an eye out for that, but that's not isolated to them. Other utilities certainly think it's their right to pipe leachate directly into water bodies. That's obviously a real problem, as all of those toxic chemicals we just talked about are contained in that water that filters through the coal. On the side of water quantity, there's a great deal of cooling water that gets used for these facilities. One kind of interesting point, there's a lot of conversation when we talk about renewable energy and transition of our energy system around the reliability of renewables, the variability of renewables. I think it's much less talked about, the reliability of fossil fuel plants. And so just for example, this past winter, very, very cold spell, lots of electricity needed. The news that came out from the Omaha, Western Iowa area was Mid-America has its best day ever of wind production. That's awesome news. What they didn't say is that none of the coal plants on the Missouri River could operate because of ice dams. There was no water coming through. And so, thank goodness, right, we had this resource available during that time period. But as water on the Missouri becomes less and less reliable between flooding and drought, the reliability of these plants also is really in question, and locating, even more of this sort of thermal resource in those areas we really need to think carefully about.
So, I really wish I would have brought a slide. I wish I could have showed you a little map that I made. But if you want to go on Instagram, on Great Plains Action Society's Instagram site, and scroll down about 60 images, you'll see a little map I made which shows you the area and where these coal plants are in reference to the Winnebago and Omaha reservations in Sioux City. Excuse me. And of course they're closer to Sioux City as well, because to South Sioux City, then of course, North Sioux City itself, and when South Sioux City is an area where there's higher populations of Indigenous peoples, both Native American and folks from south of the border. But yeah, back to this question, how can coal plants impact water quantity and quality? Well, that's pretty obvious, because all of us here, we're kind of preaching to the choir in this room, so we don't necessarily have to explain, like, what do coal plants do, right? We know that. One thing I think we should add to this is what is it, how is it impacting water? Well, it's taking away its rights. So, has anybody here heard of rights of nature? Yeah, so for those of you that haven't, Rights of Nature is a movement, a global movement actually, and I would encourage you to go to GARN, G-A-R-N, Global Alliance for Rights of Nature, I believe. So you can find out more and understand how communities all over the world are legalizing rights of nature, just like the rights of a human for different entities, such as rivers and lakes and the salmon and the wild rice. And that's what's happening right now to the Missouri River. It hasn't had its rights now for a very long time, right? Not just because of these coal plants, but since the invasion, right? And so we need to start looking at things differently as a society. And we need to look at these entities as our brothers and our sisters, our relatives, and we need to protect them like we would protect our own relatives, right? So if your mom's sick, what are you going to do? Are you going to ignore her, right? No, you're not. Why is it so easy for us to ignore what's going on then with the river that we live by, that nourishes us, right? That provides us with everything we need, pretty much. Why is it so easy to ignore that river? Well, that's because of colonial capitalist thinking, right? And that's because this world is run by a toxic European patriarchy, which we really need to, get rid of, right? And so part of that is to also embrace and uplift a movement called rematriation, which is to, bring back all these, rematriate the prairie, to rematriate the water, to clean the water, to get rid of these coal plants, and then also to give land back to the people it was stolen from, because we could probably steward it a lot better, I'm just saying. And look at Iowa, right? I mean, if white folks knew what they were doing, would we be in this predicament right now? And I'm not trying to, I'm honestly saying that, white colonial capitalist thinking is why we're in this predicament, right? Not to say that there's wonderful white folks out there that are also trying to help solve the problem. But the matriarchy also is about a feminist movement, about bringing back the matriarchy, bringing power back to the feminine. And these are very important concepts to keep in mind when we talk about the health and the impacts on the water, because it's this other way of thinking that got us here in the first place. So I just wanted to, I'm going a little bit off, but also it's very, very key. It's kind of at the base of what we have to change in general.
Thanks, Kyle. I'm going to open this question to anybody, but it's probably, I would say, more directly at Carrie. So, can the electric system operate reliably without coal plants?
Oh, so sorry.
That's okay. So we're in a process of a long transition, and we know that it would have been nicer to have a longer time to make this transition, but that there is an imperative that we get rid of burning fossil fuels in order to address climate change. And so, yes, the system can operate reliably without coal, It is a process of change. It is not one day you turn off all of the coal plants in Iowa. It is really calling on our policymakers to say it's time to make sure that our monopoly utilities have a plan for phasing out coal in a way that keeps our system reliable, because we know that there are people across our state who rely on electricity for the healthcare equipment in their homes, for their jobs, to keep their families warm and safe. It is an imperative to have reliable electricity. So we know that we need a few things to make that happen, and one is transmission lines. That one was for you, Veronica, for somewhere. To carry electricity across different parts of the United States. If there's a weather event happening in one place, you'll have electricity coming in from someplace else. You need that. You need that to be able to carry electricity around, especially when the wind's blowing over here, maybe it's sunny down there, you can get your mix working. You also need some kind of storage. Battery storage is one technology, but people are working on lots of different kinds of long-term and long-duration storage. And then local, small, I like to call them like micro-resiliency or smaller solutions are also really important to this. So communities coming together to figure out microgrids and utilities really using the resources of the people who are their customers. If you have an electric car in your garage, that's a backup resource for the grid. Utilities really need to be a lot more creative about how they're thinking about this, but we can't do it. It's just that we have to keep walking forward, and we have to have a plan to make it work reliably.
Can I say something that is different from what Terry is addressing, but it has to do with the plan?
Sure.
Okay. So one of the big questions that our coalition, the Clean Up Mid-American Coalition, has been asking is, what is the plan Mid-American? What is the plan Mid-Am? And I want to, in light of what Carrie said, we have the technology. It is a transition, but we have done transitions before. I mean, why are we even where we are today? Because we transitioned from very old energy sources to coal. That was a huge transition. We now need to transition away, not just coal. Natural gas is also overrated. Natural gas for energy has huge problems associated with it, health problems. So, what is the plan? And I will again address it from the health standpoint, because you can address it from the cost standpoint and from the technology standpoint. There are plenty of arguments, and the science every day for storage of energy, all of that is evolving quickly, and we don't have a choice, period. But I again want to ask the question of what is the plan Mid-American and all other energy providers who still run energy on fossil fuels, particularly coal. I want to ask that question by looking you in the eyes and saying, do you have children at home? Do you care about those children? Do you care about your grandchildren? Do you care about your friends' children? Because if you do, then please take into account that children are not just miniature adults. Children breathe differently. They inhale more air in relation to their body weight than adults. They breathe faster. Their growing bodies use resources very quickly. They spend a lot of time actively moving. They spend a lot of time outdoors. How can you still knowingly pollute the environment when we have such better alternatives? How do you knowingly still do that? One interpretation is you don't care enough about the children. Because what I can tolerate as far as pollution, your grandchildren cannot. Because their metabolisms are very, very different. And there's not just a climate time bomb, there's a health time bomb here that you have the power and the responsibility to stop now.
Thanks, Bree. Actually, that's going to segue into a question that maybe maybe I'll also address first to Scouts in terms of, do you believe the communities that are hosting these plants are aware of the potential impacts that the plants are having on their health?
I'm glad you asked that question because through this work, I have found that the indigenous communities in the area, again, the Winnebago, Omaha nations, and the indigenous folks in the Sioux City area, don't even really realize these coal plants are there. And, even when talking to some of them who should know they're there because they're like a tribal historic preservation officer or something like that, they're like, oh, yeah, I didn't know that, or I never really thought about it, and that is like, wow to me, I have been really shocked by that. And so, we've been with the Clean Up Minnesota campaign now for a couple of years, but it's been a little slow going for us because we're so small. And to just, build the resources and the capability with staff time to get to this point where we can truly be within the communities and doing more work it's taken till about now. So I'll be going and presenting, actually Nicole's gonna come with me now, and presenting to the Winnebago Nation on October 3rd. And then we'll also be, I'll be on a panel in Sioux City at the next day with the feds and basically folks from DC are coming into town for a listening session. So I'll be speaking about that issue as well in the Sioux City area. And then we are right now in the midst of planning a water rights caravan, which will be going in a U kind of shape, starting in Sioux City, going through Omaha, Winnebago reservations down to Omaha City, and then Iowa Nation, which is still down in the Missouri there, and then to Kansas City, St. Louis, up to the Quad Cities on the Mississippi side there. And we'll be talking to folks about local issues with their water and educating folks about rights of nature for the water and rematriation and those things, and trying to get more folks involved with our growing coalition. This actually started with the Mississippi River Summit that we hosted Mississippi River Rights Summit that we hosted last year, which speaks to what we were talking about earlier with the everything that happens here travels downstream. We had 40 folks from the headwaters down to the Gulf of Mexico come and talk about the different issues they're dealing with on the Mississippi. And we hosted it in Iowa because Iowa was the number one contributor to the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. And so there's folks down there in New Orleans and that whole delta that came up to talk about all the bullshit they're dealing with because of us, right? Sediment buildup, or silt buildup, and all that's basically our soil, just running rampant down there. Almost like a petri dish, just filled with all the things that the bad things, right? The pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, fertilizers. You guys know what I'm talking about. And then, so we are working really hard to get this information to the communities. We put information out at powwows. We have information out right now at our GeoTV booths as much as we can. But there's a long way to go. I don't know what to say. It's like some communities that are very disenfranchised just don't have this information readily available to them until their own people like us, make that effort. So And thank you to Madame for also asking us to be a part of their group and giving us a platform and some resources to, not Madame, the company, the cleanup Madame, the company, the other Madame. So thank you to the cleanup Madame folks, because it's been nice to have friends and folks that we can work with that make this work a little easier.
I want to add something here, and I'm going to switch to Spanish for a moment. ¿Cuántos de ustedes aquí entienden español? ¿Cuántos de ustedes han traído a sus familias? A ver, levanten la mano si hablan español. Una. ¿Alguien más? ¿Entiende más o menos? Okay. Muchas de las comunidades que trabajan acá tienen como prioridad el futuro de sus hijos, que es un futuro económico. Y no es así de fácil llegar a una comunidad y decir, esto es lo que está sucediendo, la persona que le está dando a usted su trabajo, esa compañía que produce energía a base de carbón, esa también le está dañando la salud a sus hijos. Eso presenta un dilema. Okay, I'll switch to English, everybody relax. Now, what if I had been telling you, you must leave this building in 2 seconds because some pipe broke? You don't have access to that information, right? Because you didn't just understand what it said. And that's exactly the same with information about polluters in your community. If you don't have access to the information, you're not informed. And then the second level is that a lot of people, especially again, unfortunately, again and again, people of color, have certain priorities, and one of them is just to get through the day and then have something to eat. And for us to come in and say, Mid-American is polluting your community, you've got to vote, you've got to do this, you've got to speak up, they're just collapsing at the end of the day going, oh my gosh, what else do I have to worry about? So communities are all, and then maybe they lose their jobs, right? If they speak up against their employer. So communities, access to information is a complicated thing that has to do with lots of factors.
I'm going to pivot on that just a little bit and go to Carrie. And I want her to talk a little bit about, I'll say, community awareness as we discovered through the Iowa State coal plant study.
First, I just want to say, I just feel so lucky to get to work on the campaign with both of you and a lot of the other folks in the room. It's been just an awesome experience. And the plenary panel at the end of the day is going to talk about different ways that we build power in a difficult environment in Iowa. And this is one of the ways of getting together and really, holding corporations accountable for their behavior when the politics aren't necessarily on our side. And so it's just been a really amazing experience. I just wanted to say that. But now I forgot the question. Can you ask me again?
Yeah, so the study on coal plants basically, and the community awareness for lack thereof.
Sure, thank you, yeah. So a few years ago, when we were just kind of starting to get into this work and realizing we were really gonna have to hammer home on coal, one of the first things we did was have Iowa State University Extension conduct a study of the economic impacts of the coal plants in the communities where they were located. We really wanted to have a good understanding of what this means economically for those communities, for workers at the plants, for tax revenue, for all of that. And as part of that, one of the things Iowa State did was also a survey of people in each of those communities about the pros and cons, what would their concerns be about the plants as they're running, if they shut down, etc. And it was definitely interesting. There was almost a sense for the people who were aware of the plants, which was I would say the ones that I looked at in detail, was a pretty high percentage of people were aware of them. They might have seen it as a kind of like a landmark. Maybe they didn't even know it was a coal plant, but it was like, oh, those are the smokestacks I see when I'm, coming into this part of town, or, I know I'm almost home when I see the Lion Energy or Graham smokestacks. And then there's also, just the electricity system has changed a lot. And it used to be that a lot of communities have their own power plant, and that's just not the way it is anymore. And so there's also, some understanding or belief that they need their local coal plant to keep the electricity on at their home or their business. And that's not the case either. We have a grid that's interconnected across the entire central United States and beyond into Canada. And so that energy is, created and dispatched across a very broad region. But that's, folks day to day, flipping the lights on, expecting the power to go on, and dealing with, their kid who didn't sleep last night or not really, or whatever, going to work and getting by. And so, definitely we found that there was, not a big awareness of the plants or kind of the reality of the energy system as it stands today. There's a lot of education to do.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up a little bit because one of to me, the stark realities that came through, and it goes back into the transition aspect and what it is that the companies actually are telling the communities. And it was very clear that the message being communicated to the communities is we have no plans to close these plants. And in fact, many of the community members not only think they're going to run forever, but they actually will be added to as far as more plants. So again, if the company isn't actually communicating with the public, then that perception, I'll just say, sort of overrides sort of other avenues that are available, which leads into my next question, which is, why are we still operating them if we know that wind and solar are far cheaper?
All right, well, I'll try to keep this short. But, I've alluded a few times to our regulatory system in Iowa. So we have monopoly utilities here, and the state decided to make our utilities monopolies. So, it depends where you live, that's your electricity provider. It's based on their service territory. You don't get to choose between providers, and so you don't get to say like, oh, does this one have a lower price or a higher price? You just get what you get. And so the Utilities Board, or the recently changed their name to the Iowa Utilities Commission, then is supposed to regulate those monopoly utilities economically to make sure that, yes, they are for-profit corporations who have to deliver returns to their investors, but they also have accountability to us and need to be charging us a fair price at the end of the day. That regulatory compact, that system in Iowa, has gotten so skewed by legislative action over the past 10 to 15 years that regulatory compact really is no longer in place. It is very much the utilities basically getting a rubber stamp for whatever it is that they want to build and then pass along the costs to customers. And so even though they have coal plants that are losing money, they have that asset and they're earning money on that. And so they don't want to shut it down. If they shut it down, then they stop earning the profit that they get off of that lump of building, that piece of steel. And that is not something that they're willing to give up. So they want to build more and more and more and keep earning that rate of return or keep the things running. And as long as our Utilities Commission isn't holding them accountable to say, hey, wait a second, what is actually the lowest cost option? What is actually the most efficient thing for you to do? And bringing in what is best in terms of the health of Iowans and the safety of people here, that accountability just isn't happening. And so one thing we've been fighting for a number of years is called integrated resource planning. It's a common sense policy that almost every other state has. Iowa's only one of 5 states that doesn't have either that or competition. And so, yeah, it's really, we're way out of the ordinary in this. And so, so we've really, been bringing attention to that, and our business customers are also pretty tired of the situation of just a lack of accountability on what the utilities are doing.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I'm going to add just to that, and then we'll have actually right at time. So clearly, one of the things that has changed in the state is Iowa, like a lot of states used to, have to basically demonstrate the need to actually build. But Iowa, basically back around 1999, changed the statute so that they no longer had to just demonstrate the need for their customers, but rather the statute was changed to allow them to continue to build as long as they can demonstrate a reasonableness of it. And what that's allowed them to do then is to sell into the market, which is fine. It keeps costs low. But because we never have a process like an IRP to basically say, well, do we still need that one plant? We just keep building more. And with that, I think we are right at time.
Let me budge in and say there's a little red table back there that has some of our fact sheets. Take one of each that Moms Clean Air Force puts out, and Ecomadres. A lot of them are bilingual. You can go on our website, momscleanairforce.org or ecomadres.org, and download any fact sheet. You can put them under, asthma, cold, whatever, climate, heat, extreme heat, burning plastics, those kinds of things you can select. But take those, please, and if anybody wants information and wants to be notified when we have something that Moms or Ecomadres does, I have a sign-up list here. My business card is here and there. There isn't time for questions, but I'll hang around a little bit if you have questions.
Okay, for Sakalis, Kareem, and Carrie, do you want any comment? Okay, go ahead. Yes?
Check out our website, aircleansaction.org. I'll hang around to you if you have questions.
Okay, so Sakalis, Kareem, and Carrie, thank you very much, and let's thank our